Hi, I'm Frank A. Lancio. On behalf of the Civil Discourse Club of the Villages, I'd like to welcome you to this podcast. We're looking at cool things about CDDs, Community Development Districts. In this podcast, we're going to focus on the issue of why does the Villages still look so good? CDD Boards of Supervisors play a key role in the way that the Villages looks. When a section is built by the developer, they pick all of the design themes. They create the entire environment. But as we've talked about in other podcasts, over time the developer, people that are on the board that were elected by the developer transition out, and CDDs transition to leadership by a 5-member board of residents elected by residents. That supervisory board plays a real key role in the Villages. For example, if you've taken anybody through the Villages that's on a visit, you can start at Brownwood and now even at Fenny and drive all the way up to Spanish Springs. It's almost like an archaeological expedition because from Spanish Springs to Brownwood is a 26-year gap in time, and then from Brownwood down to Fenny is a couple more years. And so in that whole space of time, you can go through this entire more than 10-mile, almost 20-mile stretch, and you'll see lots of similarity in the design cues and the way things are organized and signage. It's not an accident. One of the first things that the CDD board does is they determine the level of maintenance in each of our areas. So if you look, the multimodal paths, for example, they look the same from the beginning to of the Villages up in Spanish Springs all the way down to Fenny. But actually those paths cross through 13 different residential CDDs, Community Development Districts. Each has its own territory, and within that territory, they each have responsibility to maintain. They make decisions about how they're going to maintain those paths. Same thing applies to flowers and fences and everything else. So at the most basic level, if you like the way the Villages looks, thank the CDD Boards of Supervisors because they annually budget and work through the district government, contract with the district government to maintain things. A second thing that's really key in the role that the CDD Boards of Supervisors has is that when you bought your home, you signed deeds and covenant restrictions. They said, among other things, that you agree that besides, if you ever try to make changes to the outside of your property, you will coordinate those changes first through an architectural review committee, an architectural review process. Now each CDD could run its own architectural review committee. They choose rather to fund a central architectural review committee run by the district government. But something that's very important, when you put a request in for a change to your home, that ARC process, Architectural Review Committee, they don't use a generic standard. Each CDD has its own set of architectural guidelines, and those are the standards that the ARC uses when they look at your request. So if you're in CDD 10, it's the CD10 architectural guidelines. Now, what if you disagree with the decision of the Architectural Review Committee? Well, there are 2 cases in which you can appeal. The first is that you didn't receive due process, and the second is that they misinterpreted their own guidelines. They didn't accurately apply the actual guidelines for your CDD. If you do that, the CDD Board of Supervisors actually goes through a quasi-judicial process. It's a very structured review in which the Architectural Review Committee presents evidence of what they did, and then where your areas of non-compliance are, then you're given an opportunity to speak, and then the board renders a decision. Now, if they decide in your favor, then you're golden, you don't have anything to do. But if they decide that the Architectural Review Committee's initial decision was correct, then you're given a period of time to make a correction. Well, what if you don't? Well, then get ready for some fines, because they can impose a daily fine until you bring your property back into compliance with the guidelines for your CDD. What if that doesn't work? Well, get ready for a court case, because they can actually bring you to court. Now that sounds severe when we're talking about dealing with residents, but we know that sometimes a resident may pass away and leave a property that ends up being foreclosed. So we need those kinds of provisions to deal with banks and other folks that might not want to keep their property up because it's not, there's nobody in it now. And that's really important to keep us from becoming areas of blight in our neighborhoods. Finally, the first CDD, CDD1, was approved in 1992. 26 years later, CDD 13 was approved. That's a long time span, 26 years. And along the way, innovations were brought in by the developer as they move from one section of the Villages to another. It's not unusual for people to see something they like that is allowed in a different CDD and then see if they can have it implemented in their CDD. Well, how would you do that? The CDD board owns the guidelines for your CDD. So you take your request to them and request a change in the architectural guides for your district area. That happened in CDD 10 this past year. New homes in Fenny were being built with front pergolas. The guidelines in CDD 10 only allowed pergolas to be built at the back of residences. Residents brought the request for front pergolas to the CDD 10 board. The board chose not to authorize the construction of front pergolas, but they did authorize the construction of pergolas on the side of a house if there were sufficient easements. So those are three ways in which the CDDs play a real role, and the CDD boards of supervisors in particular, in how the place looks. But the key issue here is really, when a decision is made, what's the basis? Is it just your taste versus theirs? No. The key principle that has really allowed us to maintain a wonderful environment across the entire villages is the concept of harmonious architectural design at the community level. Now, what does that mean? Well, this chart has the actual 7 principles that underlie architectural design. The one that we're most interested in is harmony, the combination of elements to form a consistent and orderly whole. I want you to think about driving from 466 towards Lake Sumter Landing at dusk. You look to your right, and what do you see? I think this is one of the most beautiful views in the entire villages. Everything seems to blend together, all the lights, all the buildings, it's just gorgeous. Now, the problem comes up when somebody wants to make a change to their property and they don't really care about the impact on the overall community, and they don't really care about harmony. That's called emphasis. You want your house to be different, to stand out. That's an architectural design principle, but it's not the one that keeps us looking the way we do as a community. So what happens if we were to change the rules at Lake Sumter Landing? Well, harmony would be out the door. If we were to say, hey look, any one of you restaurants, any one of you businesses, you can build whatever size sign you want, of any height you want, with any illumination you want. What would you see when you came across Morse Boulevard? Probably something like this. This looks a lot like 466, doesn't it? Unregulated, no harmony. Yes, things stand out, but there's no sense of architectural whole. So concluding observations. When the developer builds a new section of the villages or builds a new town center, they create a look, a feel, a harmonious architectural whole. But without the intervention of the CDD boards, it would be very difficult to maintain that. So our CDD boards play a key role in maintaining the way that the villages looks, even 26 years after the creation of CDD1. On behalf of the Civil Discourse Club of the Villages, I'm Frank A. Lancione. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for listening.